God bless everybody today. It's October 10th of 2023. And if you haven't been paying attention within the last 24 to 48 hours, October 9th, we saw a literal invasion into Israel and thousands of rockets being launched into their areas. And they're in the process right now of cleaning those areas out. Trying to remove these groups from Israel and then starting a ground invasion, which has already started to actually happen because they're using artillery barrages to soften up the front before they actually go in. So it literally did start on October 9th, and you're going to see this ramp up tremendously as we move forward in the next few weeks or months. But one of my jobs, at least I believe, and I'm just an analyst, okay? But as an analyst, I have to teach you my findings, okay? Or show you my findings. And then you can determine based on what I'm giving you whether there's any validity to it. So when I show you these findings, I'm going to show you the findings and I'm going to act like this is what it really is, okay? And I believe actually that is what it is. Now we're going to see in the next few months as we walk into December 22nd of 23 whether this is going to play out and we see an actual siege on Jerusalem. I want to go into Daniel 10 because this is extremely important to understand what is coming up and how you should be looking at this prophecy a little differently. So let's go back in history because we need to put this into context of history and move it into the future so you can understand what's coming up today. And it's actually happening right as we speak because Israel now is in the process of basically in getting ready to do a land invasion into Gaza. They've actually been bombarding the front lines right now, and so they're softening this up. This started on October 9th. As Daniel tells us, it's going to, based on the dates that he gives us, and I'm going to show you how this all works. But I want to put this in context. I want to take you back through the history so you can understand how all this goes together, what was going on the ground, and what Daniel was seeing at the time, so you can sort of put that in context today, okay? So in the third year of Cyrus, now realize Daniel was in captivity for 70 years, which I think is really interesting because at the end of his time of these four kingdoms that he was under control of, because he was in captivity for 70 years, it sort of alludes to almost like a 70-week thing because at the end of this we see an Iranian attack that leads into an attack by Turkey as you move through this prophecy, which would then go against Israel. And so we're at that last week. He sort of does these types of things to make you think about, why was he in captivity for 70 years? And why are we talking about 70 weeks of Daniel and how that equates to where we are today? It's extremely important that we understand these things. So in the third, let's read Daniel 10 because Daniel 10 is extremely important to understand where you are today. On top of Daniel 8, which happens first as you walk into Ezekiel 38 and 39. So Daniel 8 will happen first. Once the Medes and Iran align, Turkey comes over, smashes them. You go to Ezekiel 38 and 39. That leader of Gog from Turkey, from the land of Magog, which is in Turkey, will come down and smash both those nations, the Kurds and Iran. So you're going to see that happen. And what are we watching? Turkey doing a massive bombardment onto the Kurds. He just finished his first phase yesterday. He's getting ready to start his second phase. He clearly indicates that he's going to ramp this up and then he's going to deal with these terrorists and he wants to reestablish that 30-mile buffer zone. So we need to understand what's happening today. So in this third year of Cyrus, we need to go look at Cyrus because that's important to understand where he is in time. So Cyrus was is a huge king, man, of the Medo-Persians, okay? Medo-Persians. Medes, Kurds, Persians, Iran, okay? You need to understand the terminology and what they're talking about in these chapters. But when you come down through here, you realize that he was the king of kings, okay? Because he ruled a huge, vast property called basically the Ottoman footprint. Wow, look at that. That is Alexander the Great's footprint. That is Cyrus's footprint when he controlled these areas. It's amazing how this footprint comes up. If you look at the footprint of the three beasts in Daniel 7 and you combine them in those areas, this is the same footprint. This is the same footprint as Alexander the Great. It's the same footprint as the Ottomans, okay? You know, when they, right before World War I and they were destroyed. And if you think about it, the Ottomans are the feet of iron and clay in the statue, and that is the seventh kingdom before the eighth kingdom. So you ought to be watching the Ottomans. Look, if you're moving this into Europe and you're not looking at the statue, okay, you have to use what God gives you. You can't just speculate this in the ground. That's why I give you all these things that the Bible gives you to determine where we are in time, and then you can make those decisions. But you need to go do your own studies like I have. I'm just showing you my findings. Maybe you'll find more information in here than I have found. So Cyrus comes down and takes over all these areas between 559 and 530 BC. And you can see he's the king of Persia, the king of Media, the king of Lydia, which is in Turkey, and then he ends up being the king of Babylon, okay? And what happens is Cyrus comes down, and in basically 3 years later, wow, amazing how this all lines up, Cyrus becomes the king of all of Persia, okay? Which was an Assyrian assault, a revolt among the Syrians in 547 BCE. So this is extremely important that you see these connections. Okay, so Cyrus is in his third year. Daniel is in the kingdom of Iran in Shush. Okay, he's watching this actually happen. And actually he's on the Tigris River, which is just outside of Shush in Baghdad. Okay, I'm going to show you some of this on the maps. Daniel at this very time has a vision. Okay, but before that, he's sickened for 3 weeks. And I talked about these dates and how if you look at the king that was in place, we're talking about the Babylonian and the time when he's in place, that this would be on a very specific date. I've shown you how I found all these dates. So if he's mourning for 3 weeks, 21 days based on verse of Daniel 10:13, because if you go down to 10:13, it indicates that the prince of Persia withstood him for 21 days, and then Michael goes forward against the prince or king of Persia, or the leader of Persia, that you'll understand that this is extremely important, that when Daniel's mourning for 3 weeks or 21 days, he realizes that there's this war starting up at this very moment in time. That when you get down to this first date stamp, okay, this is extremely important, and this is why it plays into these two groups I put here. On the 4th and 24th day of the first month, okay, and I've explained how I came up with that. So if you take January 24th, I talked about the king, it ends up in 23. We're talking about Zedekiah, Jehoiakim, and Nebuchadnezzar, and how those three work together. It ends up being on this very specific year. It's past the future kings. When you go into January 24th, first month of January, which would be on the Gregorian calendar, and then you move this to a Hebrew calendar and convert those dates, it ends up being October 9th of 23. Now realize that he had been mourning for 3 weeks prior to this, so that ended up being September 18th of 23. And what did we see? On the 16th, we saw Erdogan threaten to leave the EU because he wasn't getting his way. He just had another bombing in Ankara, so he's going to basically have to deal with the Kurds and this, what he considers a terrorist organization. And then right after that, on the 18th, we saw him start these massive bombings onto the Kurds, which no one's paying attention to. And I've been showing you these reports. So 21 days later, he literally has a vision while he's standing on the river Hedekyle. Okay? I'm probably butchering these names. And so when you look up the river Hedekyle, that is the river Tigris, as it states here in Daniel 10:4. And on this very specific day, he's standing on the Tigris, which is in Iraq, and he's literally watching missiles. And now I'm sure he can't see into Israel, but he knows what's going on. He knows they're literally attacking him, Israel and his country, from multiple fronts at that very moment in time. And as you can see, this is Iran. This is the Tigris. Okay. When you look at this, maybe we can blow this up. The Tigris runs along the outside in Iraq, okay? The Ulai River runs down through here, okay? So he ends up pooling these Kurds right around in here between Baghdad and Shush, and he's standing on the Tigris watching Iran literally form a plan that's literally attacking Israel at that very moment, and he knows that, and so he's sickened by that because he knows that he can't do anything, even though he's like the third in charge of that area of Iran. He has no capacity to stop what's happening, and they're literally going to siege, go against Israel. But then the Babylonian comes in from the north and starts that attack down into Syria, into Lydia, okay? Just as Alexander the Great did this, okay? Just realize this is what's happening, okay? So the Babylonian will come in, and then you see that destruction of Jerusalem. So let's go look at that real quick. So hopefully this isn't confusing. When you look at Daniel 7, he gives you the lion, the bear, and the leopard. Why? Because in the past, Iraq falls, then Iran, Medo-Persian, and then you see Turkey get destroyed at the very end, and then we would see an Antichrist in the future happen. In this case, we see the Babylonians fall, which is Iraq. Then Cyrus comes up. So Nebuchadnezzar would fall. Cyrus, or the Medo-Persians, would come up next. So the Babylonians are the head of gold. The Medo-Persians are the silver shoulders and chest. And so they would come up next. And then you have the bronze waist and, thighs. That would be the Turkish army coming up next through that last area. And so you need to understand that he gives you three animal kingdoms that actually melt down into a beast kingdom. And it's really amazing that that kingdom is basically the same footprint as this here. Okay? It's always the same footprint. It always ends up being the same footprint. It's the Ottoman footprint. It's Alexander's footprint. And it was also the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, and Macedonian footprint, as I've shown you on those charts in Daniel 8 and how they all work together, because this area now is the Ottoman footprint. This is the new area that Erdogan wants to reestablish by the end of 23, and he's going to do it. So Cyrus comes in later, okay? But before this, we have that first temple siege that I talked about in about 589, 588, 587 BC. And it's an 18-month process to siege this city, and I keep talking about this. It's not an overnight sensation. Jerusalem will be under tyranny for up to almost 2 years from the start of the attack to the actual time of the siege and the breaking in of the walls. And so a lot's going to happen here. You have the siege of Jerusalem in this gap by Nebuchadnezzar. Then what happens? You come to Cyrus of his reign between 550 559 and 530. So this would happen after 589 to 587, okay? So there's a procession of events. The Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, and then Turkey will come in later, okay? Or the third kingdom. All three of those kingdoms' footprint will melt down into one footprint, basically, over time, which is Alexander the Great's footprint, ends up being the Ottoman footprint in World War I, and will be the Beast Kingdom footprint as we move forward. So realize that all this is happening, and hopefully I'm explaining this properly. So let's go back to Daniel 10. So he's on the Tigris. He's looking at this happening in front of him. He's been sickened for 3 weeks because he knows now they're literally launching attacks on Israel, and this is ramping up to a massive invasion by Israel and a counterattack, as I've been talking about, on October 9th of this year. So when you go back to this, he's sickened for those 3 weeks, which was when Erdogan left. He's trying to leave the EU on 16. He threatened to. He wants those F-16s. But now that Mendez has happened, and we're trying to move weapons to Ukraine and Israel, I don't know if he's going to get his F-16s, and that might just be the thing that forces him to say, you know what, I've had enough of this, and I'm just going to do my thing. And then you've got that eclipse on the 14th, and if you look at that picture of that ring of fire, it's almost like a birthing canal. You have this fiery ring around this, center, and it looks like you might see something literally come out of this, which might be an actual invasion by Turkey before long or something like that. Now, will it happen on the 14th? I don't know. Maybe we'll see a massive invasion by Israel on the 14th, because even though they're bombarding, and I think it's going to happen maybe sooner, there's so many things happening, but they're bombarding and softening up the fronts, but they also have to eliminate all the terrorists in their country and then set up this massive artillery, and they'll have everything. They've got 100,000 guys on this border with tanks and everything. So they're amassing this to get ready, and they're going to go in. This is going to be a hard takeover of Gaza. He's talking about a total siege of this area, which is then going to force Hezbollah, the Houthis, and all these other groups and Iran to determine what they're going to do next, and there'll probably be a counterattack on the north as they actually do a land invasion into the south. And that's really sort of interesting. Israel's putting another 200,000 people on their other borders, but they're prepping for a southern border incursion only to get hit on a northern border and hope that they can do multiple different tasks to try to protect their country and their people. And when Gaza and these Hamas attacked, they're talking about over 1,000 people killed. This is unprecedented. This never in the history of the Jews in the last 50 years, other than the Yom Kippur War, has this happened. So this is a huge event that's happening over here. So let's go down through here. We're talking about this potential attack on Iran into Gaza. This is going to develop into a much broader conflict as we move forward. And then if you have Turkey come in from the north, this will really be a nightmare. And that's what I keep talking about. This is not over. This is just starting. So Daniel is having this vision on the 24th day of the first month, which is October 9th. He's standing there alone. So that's another thing. I'm so tired of people saying that you have to have visions and things and everybody else has to be in the room and watch it, because you have to have confirmation. It has to be 2 or 3 witnesses or it can't happen. Well, Daniel had a vision on his own and it happened. So I don't agree with that. Do you need confirmation? Your confirmation is that you actually see this prophecy happening in front of you. That you get it. It doesn't necessarily mean that multiple people have to have a vision of that prophecy, and then it happens, okay? Only Daniel had a vision alone. He explained it to everybody, and then it occurred, and then they got it. Wow. It's amazing. He was in a deep sleep. He fell on the ground. It was at night. He has this vision, and then this angel comes to him and says, look, Michael is in the room at this point. The angel Michael. He comes down and he says, look, I know you don't get what's going on here, so I'm going to explain this to you. I want you to understand so you will not be frightened to death, and God is controlling what's happening in front of you. So he says, look, the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. Okay, 21 days. He's been mourning for 3 weeks. He knows this is happening because he knows the battle has started to preempt into something that's going to be huge after October 9th when he has this vision. So he has the vision, he falls on the ground, and then the king, or then the Michael, the archangel, comes and says, look, I've been attacking for 21 days upon them. He's withstood me for 21 days. And now Michael, the chief, is going to go against the chief princes, against Persia itself, or the king of Persia, and he will remain there with the kings of Persia. Okay, so let me read how it states. Prince of the king of Persia withstood me, Michael, for 21 days. Lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the king of Persia. Okay? So you need to understand that Michael, the archangel Michael, is involved. And then he says something really important. Now I am come to make you understand what will fall in thy people in the latter days. And yet the vision is for many days. So he's telling you it's not going to be an overnight sensation. That it's going to take a little time to clean this up. And I talked about that siege from Turkey on December 22nd of 23. And everybody says that is the craziest timeline I've ever seen. It just can't happen. The Turkey from today till December 22nd of 23 could ever do all that I've been talking about and literally have taken over Iran and ended up in Jerusalem with 10 nations and literally sieging this nation called Israel by December 23. So this is a latter day event. It's potentially happening in front of our eyes right this moment. You're watching an invasion by Israel into Gaza right now, which is a proxy of Iran. So he's attacking Iran. Michael comes in around the 9th of October and says, look, I'm going to go forward and I am now going to attack Iran. But, and this is a latter day event at the very end, I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I have gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. Okay? So that's what I'm telling you. Turkey's coming into this conflict soon. Michael has only so much capacity, and God's going to play this out in his, in his plan and how he's put this together. We have no real say in this. He sends Michael first. He attacks him for 21 days to begin with, and then he goes forward again after this vision on October 9th and literally does a massive attack, which we're starting to see build up right now, against Iran and its proxies. And that doesn't turn out so well because he then has to bring in the king of Greece or Turkey, which ends up being a Daniel 8 prophecy. And what does Daniel 8 say? When the Medes or the Kurds align with Iran and Persia, we would see the Grecian Empire come over and smash them, which is Turkey. Then we go to Ezekiel 38, 39, what happens? Right when you get into those first nations of Magog, which is a leader of Turkey, which doesn't include Rosh because it's not in the older Bibles, it just doesn't exist, that this nation of Turkey would then go against or invade Syria, force the Kurds to align with Iran, and when that alignment happens, we would see Turkey smash both these nations, which would then bring Persia into Ezekiel 38 and 39 because they would be absorbed and end up in Israel by December 22nd of 23. And I know that timeline is insane. I get it, man. I just had this discussion with another person, and the only thing we really have a difference in opinion, well, we have a number of difference of opinion, but he's indicating that this has to take longer to happen. I said, well, it can't, because you have to look at the parable of the fig tree. And so I've tried to explain this on my paradigm. If you go to endofdaysurvival.com, you come down to the paradigm, you blow the paradigm up, you realize that I put this for a very specific reason. Look, your ending generation, or your 40-score generation based on Psalm 90:10, is the 80th year of the nation of Israel, which is May 14th of 28, because they were established in May 14th of 1948. So he's talking about all this has to happen before that generation. Now, I just had this discussion that it has to go to 2030 or 29, and I don't agree with that, and I'll show you why. So I think this is extremely important here. Okay, so we had a Shemittah cycle start in 2021 to 2022 because the Jewish calendar, Hebrew calendars, start on the Feast of Trumpets. And then the next cycle, first year, would be 28 to 29. So I've talked about this cutoff of May 14th of 28 because the next year would not start until the Feast of Trumpets in 28, which would be in September, October. Okay? So he's talking about this strong generation in Psalm 90:10, that it would not end, or this would be the 80th year of the generation of the Jews, the fourscore generation, and that all things would happen prior to this generation. And so we should look at this cycle of completion here 7 years later to 2028, and that we should look at the fall feast of 27. Makes sense to me, but I can't seem to make sense to others that we are in that last 7-year Shemittah cycle at this very moment, and we should be looking at this very end of 28, 27, 28 as we walk into the beginning of the next Shemittah cycle, which is in 28, 29. Okay? So this is a new cycle, a beginning of a new 7-year period in September, October of 28. So all things should occur at the end of the fall feast of 27, and that's why the paradigm is so important. So let me go to the paradigm real quick. So if you go to endofdaysurvival.com, you come down here, you click on that, it brings up this paradigm. You are in this section here. I'm going to bring that up so you can see where that is and how this all works. You are right here now, okay? I've explained how there's verses attached to prophets and how 3 modern day kings reflect 3 kings of the past. You are right here now. Daniel is sickened for 3 weeks prior to the vision, and then he then sees a vision 21 days later on October 9th that Michael is going to go against Persia. Okay, we just saw a massive start of a potential land invasion and pummeling of Gaza with a total siege on that city, which the international communities coming out condemning that anyone would go in and literally siege a whole area of a country or section of the planet. Okay, so they're getting massive pushback on this, and that on October 9th we would literally see this happen based on the 24th day of the first month, as I showed you in Daniel 10. That Erdogan, over time, after he absorbs Iran, would get his crown through the Ottoman Empire And that Daniel 8 would then break down into Ezekiel 38, 39, which is a seals war, which is seals 1 through 6, because Erdogan is the white horseman of Revelation, and he will die on the 6th seal by the wrath of the Lamb, as indicated in December 22nd of 2023, based on my paradigm. And yes, that is a huge, huge change in the Middle East. If you see Turkey come down into Syria as we're watching Iranian-Israel war, that's going to complicate everything. It's going to be a massive problem over there for the whole world. And by December 22nd of 23, based on my paradigm, you would literally, on 10 Tevet of this year, you would see an actual siege on Jerusalem that will last up to 18 years. And then I talked about Daniel 24, where it clearly tells you 10 nations form first, and then after them, you see a little horn pop up and overthrow 3. Because why? In Alexander's time, after he went through the Middle East in 3 years, he died from his wounds. It fragmented down from that kingdom into 4 generals. And then what will happen in the future from those 4 areas, probably from the Seleucid area, which is in Turkey, you would see an Antichrist come up in 24. And that's really interesting, because that would fall in line with all this that I've been talking about. You would start then seeing a 7th seal break. The 4 winds are being held back. You start into a trumpet phase, which destroys 1/3 of the planet before a 5th, 6th trumpet, which is a bottomless pit opening and a rising of an Antichrist. Then the stopping of the continual burnt offerings and a literal signing of the Treaty of Nations against Israel on April 20th of 24, which is Hitler's birthday. And so when you go out and you actually look at this charting, which I've shown you so many times, you realize that this is working with the parable of the fig tree generation of Psalm 90:10. The strong generation will not end, or that you'll have that strong generation end in May 14th of 28. So all things have to happen prior to that. And so you should look at the fall feast of 27. I've showed you how the Shemittah cycle runs between 21 to 28. And so you should look at 27, the fall feast. People are extending this thing out to 2030 or 29. And you've got to wonder why when the Shemittah cycles run a specific way. And I'm not making this up. It's the way it's laid out. I've showed you all these things. So the question is, why are they not seeing this? And is Daniel 10 literally telling us that we are in the middle of this prophecy and that we're going to see a massive attack on Iran, which is going to fail, and then Turkey's going to come in shortly after that? And I keep talking about an October 14th date. Something's probably going to happen in Turkey's world that's going to force them to really go against the Kurds. And probably one of the things that is going to happen there is, because now we are shifting weapons between Ukraine and Israel, they're probably going to be denied their F-16s, and they're also being, they're trying to be a humanitarian here. But all that's going to do is allow Turkey to shift his all his military and stuff down into these areas, which is going to make it even easier for him to take them over as he moves forward here. So for me to think that God, which is amazing, that people can't think that God can't do something in a day or a minute or a second. Look, he's your creator. He can do anything. If God wants him to go through this country, combine 10 full nations, take Iran out, and get back to Israel by December 22nd of 23. I have no doubt that he can do that. And when you doubt God's abilities, I question some of your validity, because God can do anything. He's capable of anything. In a flash of an eye, he can make things happen. Okay? He's controlling this. It tells you clearly something really important in Daniel 8. So I'm going to look at Daniel 8 real quick. Let's look at Ezekiel 38, 39 real quick. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So Daniel has a vision here. He's in Shushan, in the palace. He looks up. He sees a two-horned ram, which is Medo-Persia. Kurds and Iran are going to align here. Iran is pushing towards the west, toward the north, toward the south, toward Israel, toward the great land. This goat comes from the west, from Turkey. And I get the whole earth, which back in Daniel's day was the Middle East. Hey, he didn't know about America and all that stuff. They're talking about in his world, the whole earth was the Middle East. Alexander the Great's footprint, which was the main portion of this. Turkey comes over from the west, doesn't torch the ground, and has a notable horn between his eyes. The ram that had the two horns was standing there, and then the goat comes over and destroys them, okay? So the ram comes over, and the goat smotes the ram, breaks his two horns, throws him down on the ground, stamps upon him, and basically destroys both the Medo-Persians, okay? Iran and the Kurds, once they align, as it indicates here. Then this great horn is broken itself off of the goat. So Turkey's broken, and I talked about, wow, look at this. Look at the setup on here, man. I'm telling you, every time I look at this, I get amazed. So the goat horn is broken, and then the four winds of heaven are brought up. Why? We just saw on the seventh seal the four winds are being held back. And when are they released? On the sixth trumpet. Interesting how he plays all this together. And out of them came a little horn. Wow. So the four winds happen. This goat is broken. And then we see what? A little horn come out. And he then overthrows 3 nations of the 4 clearly stated here. So 10 nations are reduced to a residue of 4. A little horn comes out, overthrows 3 other nations, turns into a beast kingdom. But the goat is destroyed, okay? He's broken, buried in the ground, because this is Gog, the first seal, as I showed you. And then from that destruction of the goat, after the destruction of the ram, we see a little horn come out, okay? And he magnifies himself even to the prince of the host, because now you're talking about Antichrist. There is a process here, okay? So when you look at this, you've got to look at all the prophecies. And then when you go to Ezekiel 38 and 39, right after, no Rosh, telling you Rosh doesn't exist. It's a mistranslation from chief prince of this land, of this king or leader. Gog is the leader of the land of Magog, which is in Turkey, which is all Meshech and Tubal's in Turkey. Go look at the old biblical maps, not the ones that people move things out to make their case, okay? And then right after that, what do you see? Persia, Ethiopia, and Lydia, which are all in Africa. And all these other nations that form against 10 nations against Israel. And so Persia has to be absorbed before Ezekiel 38 and 39 happen, which tells you that Daniel 8 must occur first. So you should be watching Kurds and the Turkey, because they're the ones that are going to be the catalyst that really starts us off. So let's look at the chart one last time real quick. September 18th, we saw literally a ramping up on Israel from Hamas, which ended up being a physical attack on the October 9th. We have a retaliatory strike going against Hamas and Gaza right now through Israel, which is going to turn into a massive ground invasion, but they started literally doing the bombardments and softening up at the fronts on this very specific date. As we move through December 22nd, 10 Tevet, we're going to watch this all break down, where Turkey will come into Israel through Syria and Lebanon. protecting the Temple Mount, end up sieging the city by December 22nd of 23, which will lead you into a sixth seal event, which will lead you into the seventh seal. Then you have the four winds being held for a release of Antichrist. After the first four trumpets go off, you have the rising, or the bottomless pit opening, and the rising of Antichrist and the false prophet. By the spring equinox of 24, and a signing of the treaty of death with the nations against Israel. And I say it's against Israel because Israel is under siege for 18 months and they have no ability to sign a treaty with anyone at this time. The nations will sign a treaty against Israel itself. That treaty is broken in the halfway mark because God says he shortens that second half. So when you go out, So when you go out to these dates that I talked about, that 1,335 days that Daniel talks about, which no one talks about, the shortening of the second half, from the 1,260 days from the signing to abomination, 75 days later, he would remove through the rapture the great tribulation people, because no one would survive if he doesn't shorten the second half. He clearly tells you that. And right after abomination, the two witnesses perish, lay in the street for 3.5 days, then rise, and he clearly tells you, do not grab anything. This is like Sodom and Gomorrah. Run from the city! Go to the mountains, because you don't want to turn into salt, and we're getting ready to rapture you prior to the bowls hitting, or God's wrath in 15:1, which is not the same wrath as Revelation 6:16, which is the wrath of the Lamb or the Son, which is during the seals back here. So you got to understand what's going on here. I truly believe that Daniel 8 and 10 are playing out in conjunction together. And literally we're going to see Daniel 8 form into Ezekiel 38-39, which will end up basically when those 10 nations, and let's go into this real quick. When those 10 nations form against Israel, he gives them power for 1 hour, okay? And this is extremely important. So when they attack on December 22nd, he gives them power for 1 hour, okay? 15 days to attack the city of Jerusalem. And so then I'm concerned on January 6th that you would see a sixth seal event, which would culminate into a changing of the whole world. And I talked about this sixth seal event and how it indicates, if you look at that, he's literally dropping surgical strikes down on these nations through stars from heaven. Okay? He induces plagues and they die, bury these guys for 7 months, burn their weapons for up to 7 years, alluding to the tribulation and great tribulation. But as he clearly tells you, in a number of things, 2 verses specifically, and I want to go into this real quick. He gives you a really interesting clue in 24:22 Matthew. Okay? And except for those days should be shortened, because he has to shorten them, there should be no flesh saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. And if you look at that 1,335 days on my chart, that would make sense, because you would have 1,260 days to abomination and then a 75-day shortened half of the second half, which would then fall in line with God's calendar. So he tells you, as you get out into these areas, that he has to shorten the second half between the signing of the treaty and abomination, which is 1,260 days. He gives you the 1,335 day stamp for a reason, because he's telling you after abomination it's going to be terrible out here, and he can't probably save his elect unless he doesn't shorten it, which is amazing, because if you take that date from April 20th of 24, which is Hitler's birthday, and you run that forward 1,335 days, it falls on the 2nd of October, which is the start of Feast of Trumpets. You can't make these dates up, man. There's too much here going on. It can't be coincidence. It just can't be random numbers thrown together. You know, everybody keeps saying, well, you just can't be right. I don't know. We're going to find out in the next 3 months. I wish people would allow this to play out. And like I told this person yesterday, because he doesn't think, and I love this guy. I love him to death. He's probably one of the best Jewish calendar guys on the planet. And I talk to him all the time, but he doesn't agree with this shortened period of this time between October 9th and December 22nd that literally we could see a siege on Jerusalem itself within about 2.5 months. He's like, this is too quick. I'm going, look, God controls this map, not us. We want to think in our terms, but God's capable. If he wants, Turkey to come in tomorrow and end up in Jerusalem the next day, you know what? He'll make it happen because God can do anything. And I don't believe that Turkey, as Alexander, was unimpeded. He went through and destroyed everything in 3 years. And so I say that was a conventional war with chariots, horses, and stuff, and it took them 3 years. This is a modern day nightmare of technology, drones, and things we can't even imagine on the ground, weapons of war that they've been creating for centuries are now modernized, and this could literally happen in about 3 months. Is it crazy? We're going to find out soon. So let's watch this play out. I want you to realize that Daniel 10 is extremely important. It connects to Daniel 8. I've shown you how all those chapters break down and other lessons. And so keep an eye on this because this one's going to play out extremely hard in the next few months. And if you guys aren't getting your oil ready, and if you don't think you're not going to be here for this, why are you, like I keep putting this down, Israel's getting attacked right now. The sorrows and the birth pains are happening. You're not supposed to be here for any of this if you're pre-rapture. So the question is, why are you listening to this very moment? You should not be here anymore. And I guess I should be abandoned by my God, and I'm still here. I'm telling you, you will be here until the 7th trumpet. The last trumpet. He tells you that for a reason, which is the 7th trumpet, which ends up on the Feast of Trumpets in 27 prior to the strong generation. And if you look at that Shemittah cycle, you realize, wow, we should be paying attention to the strong generation end in 27 because the new cycle starts in 28, 29, not 30 or 29. So you need to go to 27 Fall Feast because that's when the next Shemittah cycle will start in that next year and the Feast of Trumpets of 28. And when does the Antichrist rise? Right after 23. Okay? Right after 23 on that paradigm chart, when you go in here and you look at this, he dies. Erdogan's going to die around the beginning of 24. We're going to see a resurrectional event at the beginning around the equinox or spring equinox of 24 and a signing of the tree around April 20th of 24, which is Hitler's birthday, and a signing of a tree, which will then take you down for 3.5 years to abomination. He shortens that second half to the 1,335 days. 75 days later, you end up right on the Feast of Trumpets. 15 days later, God's bulls, or his wrath of 1 hour, which is 15 days on our calendar, falls between October 2nd and October 17th of 27, prior to the strong generational end. And if you go back into that Shemittah cycle, that wouldn't matter. Because now you start a new Shemittah cycle in 28. They're not getting it out here. I'm telling you, no one's going to see this. Turkey's going to come in like a storm, like a whirlwind, okay? And Daniel 8 clearly tells you that the ram has no ability, that there is no ability for the ram to even come close to stopping him, that he's just going to run over there and smash them, trample on him, and destroy him. And so you'll see the Medes and Iran basically the Kurds and Iran basically destroyed in a short period of time. And then right after that, we see those four winds of heaven, which happen that they're held on the seventh seal and released on the sixth trumpet, as it's indicated. So God bless everybody. This one's get crazy, and it's moving quickly on the ground right now. If you're not seeing these prophecies, and people aren't talking about Daniel 8 and Daniel 10 right now, and how they're affecting you right now, they probably aren't seeing this. And I'm sorry about these date stamps. It's my analysis. That's what I found. It seems to be happening in front of us. I'm using their dates in the Bible, converting them to Gregorian, to Jewish Hebrew calendar dates, and then using three kings of the past, which reflect three kings of today, and the times that they've been in place in the future, they've been in place in the past. And so I believe these three kings are important in my paradigm, and that's how I built my chart. It's just that simple, and I've explained all these things. So let's see how Daniel 8 and Daniel 10 play out in the next 3 months, 2.5 months. Between now and December 22nd of 23, I believe that Turkey's going to enter this conflict. You're going to see a massive incursion, ground and otherwise, with Israel on all aspects of Iran in the next 2 to 3 months, and then Turkey will come in and cause Israel all kinds of problems, because as they come down through Syria into Lebanon, and then down through Israel into Gaza and Egypt, that's going to cut Israel off from doing a whole lot but protecting themselves, and then Turkey's going to be in control of this whole madness at that point, or God is in control of this whole madness. He built the story. I didn't. I'm just telling you what's going to happen based on what he's telling us in this book, this magnificent book called the Bible. God bless. If you're not seeing this, I feel for you, because I'm afraid that you're going to get hit with a storm that you're not prepared for. If you have the seal of God, you probably are seeing this and you're concerned, but God tells us to be anxious in everything, and in that same breath he tells us to prepare so that we don't have to be as anxious, and we will feel secure that we have our faith and done what God has told us to do to prepare for what is coming. And you cannot get through this one on faith alone. He tells you to put oil in your lamp for a reason, and so if you think you're going to be taken up before all this happens, I do feel that you will be betrayed by the churches that you follow. You will not be ready for this. And I'm warning you because I care and hope that you get this and do something that will help protect you and your families. It's so important. It's so very important. And God tells you what all the things that you need to do. So if you're just standing around being ready to be taken away and you haven't done anything, then I'm guessing your outcome will be pretty bleak by the time this one's over. God bless. Find the open door. Find Jesus. It's so important right now that you find Jesus. And the Jews need to find the Son also before their judgment truly comes upon them in the next few months. God bless.